We tend to think of history as a story about people, right? About empires, battles, and big ideas. But what if one of the most important characters in that whole story has been hiding in plain sight, flowing silently just beneath the surface? So think about this for a second. What could possibly connect the survival of an entire nation from an invasion to the weather in a city thousands of miles away? I mean, they seem totally unrelated. But as you're about to see, they're not. The answer is a force of nature, one so vast and so powerful that it has literally sculpted human destiny for thousands of years, often without us even realizing it was there. We're talking about ocean currents, and you can think of them as the planet's circulatory system, a hidden engine that has been quietly steering the course of human history, from farming and trade all the way to exploration and even war. So what exactly are they? Well, in a nutshell, they are massive rivers flowing inside the ocean itself. And they're driven by things like temperature, how salty the water is, and the spin of the Earth. They shuttle just staggering amounts of heat and nutrients around the globe. And by doing that, they've basically set the stage for civilization as we know it. Okay, to really wrap your head around just how powerful these things are, let's start with a really interesting climate puzzle. A tale of two cities. On one side, you have London, England. We all know it, mild, kind of rainy. On the other side, you've got Labrador, Canada, and that place is a land of brutal cold and ice. Two totally different worlds. But here's the really weird part. They sit at almost the exact same latitude. They should have pretty similar climates. So why on earth are they so drastically different? What's going on? The difference maker is this, the Gulf Stream. It is a gigantic current of warm water that flows from the Gulf of Mexico across the Atlantic and acts like a massive space heater for all of Northern Europe. And that warmth? It changed everything. It allowed Europe to develop agriculture that could support huge populations. It made it possible for the Norse to make those incredible voyages to Greenland. And later, it created these dependable marine highways for ships during the Age of Exploration. Without the Gulf Stream, the history of the Western world would look completely different. It's that simple. So currents can act like a thermostat for a continent, but sometimes their power is so immense, so sudden, that it's easy to mistake it for, well, an act of God. And that brings us to our next story. So picture this, it's the 13th century. The Mongol Empire, probably the most powerful military force on the planet, launches two enormous naval invasions of Japan. And both times, their gigantic fleets were completely annihilated at the last possible second by unbelievable storms. Now, for the Japanese, the explanation was pretty clear. These weren't just storms. These were the kamikaze, the divine winds, sent from the heavens to protect their homeland. It became a foundational story for the entire nation. But what if that divine intervention had a powerful earthly accomplice working behind the scenes? And this is where it gets fascinating. The Kuroshio Current, which is kind of the Pacific's version of the Gulf Stream, flows right past Japan. It's constantly pumping massive amounts of heat and moisture into the air, which is the perfect fuel to supercharge a typhoon. So those divine winds, they weren't just luck. They were amplified by the ocean itself. So we've seen a current shape a climate, and another amplify a storm. But some currents didn't just cause single events. They were so predictable, they acted like clockwork, fueling global trade for centuries. Over in the Indian Ocean, the Somali Current does something pretty unique. It actually reverses direction twice a year, perfectly in sync with the monsoon winds. So in the summer, it flows northeast, making it a perfect one-way trip for ships sailing from Africa to India. Then, in the winter, it switches and flows southwest, bringing them all back home, their ships full of spices and silk. This predictable two-way highway created one of the oldest and most important trade networks in human history. It connected entire civilizations, sparked the rise of legendary port cities like Zanzibar, and became a superhighway not just for goods, but for ideas, for culture, and for the spread of religions like Islam across half the world. Okay, so currents shape our climate. They can decide the outcome of a war, and they can build our economies. But these stories aren't just one-offs. They're all part of a huge, living map of influence that covers the entire planet. The Gulf Stream, the Kuroshio, the Somali Current. These are just a couple of examples of the many unseen rivers that have been silently directing our story from the very beginning. I mean, just think about the Humboldt Current, whose incredibly rich fisheries fed the ancient empires of the Andes. Or the Canary Current, which Portuguese sailors figured out how to use to launch the age of exploration. And, of course, on a much more tragic note, it was the cold Labrador Current that carried the very iceberg that sank the Titanic. Their fingerprints are all over our history. So, the big takeaway here is this. These currents are not just interesting little footnotes in a textbook. They are a fundamental force that has shaped everything about us, from where we live and what we eat, to how we trade and who we fight. They are, in a very real way, the invisible architects of our world. They wrote so much of our past. And as our planet's climate changes, these currents are changing too, which leaves us with one final and pretty crucial question. What story are they going to write for our future?